My name is Scott Baxendale, and I own Baxendale Guitar in Athens, Georgia. I've been building and restoring guitars since 1974, and one of the things that I discovered about 10 or 12 years ago is that you can take these old Harmony guitars that were made in Chicago from the late 30s all the way up to the late 60s, and they were all made with really good quality woods, and you can take them all apart, and if you rebuild them like a pre-war Martin or in that style, then you can restore this student model guitar and turn it into a very great sounding professional grade instrument. Now the way the process works is we get the guitar in, and most of the guitars have poorly set necks, or the necks are pulled up, so we go ahead and take the neck off, and then we take the back off the guitar, and then we replace all the internal construction. And one of the reasons the Harmonies were so cheap back in the old days was that they made the insides very crude and simple, with simple straight ladder bracing, and they didn't take any time or effort to tune the bodies or to make the bracing as responsive as possible. But on the upside, they used really quality woods. In fact, the woods that they used back then is much better than the quality of woods that go in new guitars today. So we take them all apart and rebuild them, and the end result is something really fantastic. Once we get the guitar, we take the neck off, like I said, then we take the back off, we take out all the bracing and replace it with proprietary scalloped X bracing that is carved and tuned, and we put it back into the guitar. And then after we put the body back together, we plane and refret the neck, reset the neck, and we set it back to an angle that provides the ultimate in playability and also the best downward pressure on the strings to the top of the guitar, which is essential for good sound. And so we pitch the neck for optimum playability and sound, and then we make a new bridge, a new saddle, a new nut, and put on new gears, and essentially it's a full remanufacturing of the instrument. We've also learned that this is a very green technology, and these guitars that we make are probably the greenest guitar that you can get at this point in time, because we're not sacrificing any more mahogany trees or any more Brazilian rosewood trees to make these guitars, and the end result is pretty fantastic. And here's the guitar here, and this is a very clean example that Jeff sent to us, and this is our third guitar that we've done for Jeff, and we've also done one for Nels Klein, who also plays in Wilco. And he found this guitar while he was out on tour and then sent it to us to have the conversion process done to it. And so the video that we're showing you will demonstrate each step of the process and how it is done, and also what the end result is. And so instead of a kind of a honky sounding guitar that has decent volume and fairly decent tone but is stiff to play, you get a guitar that has a really sophisticated, elegant tone that is very clear all the way through the notes from the low to high, has plenty of power and punch, and really compares quite favorably to guitars that sell for many times more than what we sell these for when they're done. We build these guitars, and they compete in price with import guitars that you can buy new at Guitar Center or whatever, but it's a much better instrument. This particular guitar here is made with Honduras mahogany on the sides and back, and has a Sitka spruce top, has a mahogany neck, and a Brazilian rosewood fingerboard. And if you were to order a brand new handmade guitar or a Martin guitar or a Collings guitar that were made with these type of woods and similar quality of construction, you're looking at a guitar that sells in the $5,000 or $6,000 range to buy. Lots of sustain. And really this guitar is better than a new guitar because the wood's already been aged after it's been made into a guitar for over 50 years now, and the new bracing makes the tone and the volume and the headroom of the guitar at a much better and higher grade than it was before we did the process. It's basically like putting a V8 in a Volkswagen when you think about it. I started out building guitars in 1974 when I dropped out of the University of Kansas and went to work for Mossman Guitars. And Stuart Mossman was in Winfield, Kansas, and he was sort of the pioneer of the modern boutique guitar movement. And he was one of the first guys to have a little small factory to make limited run guitars, and his goal was to try and recreate the production totals and the number of employees and the size of shop that Martin had during their golden era, which was between 1934 and 1938. And Stuart felt that creating this type of factory would allow him to create a guitar that compared, because even in the early 70s, musicians were already noticing that the Martins made in the mid-30s were superior to the Martins made after that. So eventually, after working at Mossman for a few years, I moved to Nashville and worked for George Gruen, who was at the time and still is the foremost expert on vintage instruments, especially guitars and banjos. And I got a job doing restoration there, and he gave the repair staff a challenge, and that was to discover why a 1938 Martin sounded better than a 1939 Martin. And there was a distinctive difference. And so myself and the other folks that were on the repair staff at the time went on this mission to try and figure out what it was that separated the golden era Martins from that 4-year period from 34 to 38 from the rest of the Martins that were made after that, the Martins they make today, and even the Martins made before that too, but specifically those particular guitars. So while at Gruen's, I had the unique opportunity to have, at any one given time, more of these Martins in my possession than most people ever see in a lifetime. I mean, we had hundreds of guitars in the shop, all vintage guitars. So George Gruen challenged this repair staff to discover why a 38 Martin sounded better than a 1939 Martin. Well, Martin made plenty of guitars after 38 that were good, great, special, but there was something magic about the guitars in this 4-year period, and so we set out to figure this out. Why was this the case? Well, we had a room within a room at Gruen's, and that we had a dehumidifier in, we called the dry room, and it was where we kept our wood, and we hung finish to dry in there because Nashville is generally humid, and humid conditions are not conducive to finish curing, so we put the wood in there. Well, this room was pitch black when you shut the door because there was no outside light that came in. And so we started taking these vintage guitars inside this room and putting bright lights inside of them, and you could actually see through the top of the guitar. Well, that led me to a couple of revelations about the design of the instrument and some of the things that were unique to those guitars that they changed in 1939. And so I've evolved this design with my own guitars since then. I applied that design into I eventually owned Mossman guitars after I left Nashville in the mid-'80s, and I started applying the design to those guitars. And then as I began to teach the skills of lutherie, it became really evident really fast that a really good teaching tool was for us to take these old harmonies apart and rebuild them. Because if I'm teaching someone how to reset necks and refret guitars and make bridges and nuts and saddles, what's better than taking a $50 harmony apart and rebuilding it and doing all those things to that guitar? So I started this out as a training tool, and then I thought, well, since we're already got them all apart, why don't we just put our bracing in them and improve the bracing? Well, the results were so dramatic, and the guitars began to sell themselves because they sounded so much better than anything else that you could buy, and the price was reasonable. It just became a market within itself for people who are interested in these guitars. And over the last 10 years, that has spread. Several of the artists that use our rebuild harmony guitars include Wilco and Jeff Tweedy. They include Jason Isbell, the Drive-By Truckers, Patterson Hood. Luther Dickinson uses a lot of our guitars. Buddy Miller in Nashville. Justin Townes Earl. Those are just a few of the artists who currently use these guitars that we rebuild, and they come to us because these guitars play and sound as good or better than, like I said, the vintage Martins that the collectors lust after that cost $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. So it's something we really like doing. You know, it's more exciting to me to bring one of these guitars back to life than fixing old Gibsons, really, and stuff, because these guitars have a certain magic to them.